The research vessel Serenity of Knowledge drifted silently through the outer reaches of the Sol system, its silver hull catching faint starlight as it passed the orbit of Neptune. Inside, the ship hummed with quiet activity. Dozens of researchers moved through its corridors, their footsteps soft against polished floors. They belonged to a species that had spent 300 years studying other civilizations across the galaxy. They were good at their work. They took pride in it. Senior Archivist stood before a curved window in her private study, watching the distant yellow star that humans called the Sun. She had 47 species in her long career. She had seen civilizations that built cities in the clouds of gas giants. She had documented cultures that communicated through patterns of bioluminescent light. She had archived the dying words of species that had existed for 1 million years before fading into silence. None of it had prepared her for what her team was about to discover. The mission was supposed to be simple. Humanity was a young species, barely reaching beyond their home planet. They had sent primitive probes to their neighboring worlds. They had built crude space stations. They had not yet learned to bend space for faster-than-light travel. By every measure the consortium used, they were unremarkable. One more entry in a database that already contained 10,000 others. Had assigned her best assistant to begin the cultural analysis. Was young for a researcher, barely a century old, but he had a sharp mind and an eye for patterns. His task was straightforward. He would harvest humanity's transmitted signals, their radio waves and television broadcasts and digital networks, and begin building a profile of their belief systems. Every species had such beliefs. They were the foundation of understanding. Started with what humans called mythology. These were the stories species told before they understood how the universe actually worked. They had studied thousands of such collections. They were usually comforting tales about benevolent spirits and cosmic order. They explained natural phenomena through the actions of gods. They taught moral lessons. They were, almost without exception, gentle. The Greek myths were his first surprise. He read about a figure named Prometheus, a being of divine origin who looked upon the primitive humans and felt something like pity. The humans had no fire. They shivered in the dark. They ate their meat raw. Prometheus decided to help them. But instead of asking permission from the ruling gods, he simply took what he wanted. He stole fire from the heavens and gave it to mortals. When the king of the gods discovered this theft, Prometheus was punished severely. He was chained to a rock where an eagle would eat his liver every day, only for the organ to regrow each night so the torment could continue forever. Found this curious. In most mythologies, when mortals received gifts from higher beings, it was an act of divine generosity. The gods chose to share. The mortals were grateful recipients, but in this human story the gift was stolen. A lesser being had a greater one and succeeded, at least for a time. The humans got their fire. Prometheus paid the price willingly. He flagged the story as an anomaly and continued. The Norse myths disturbed him more deeply. These humans from the cold northern regions of their planet had created an entire cosmology built around conflict. Their highest heaven was a place called Valhalla, a great hall where warriors who died in battle would spend eternity fighting, dying, and feasting, only to wake the next morning and do it all again. They did not fear death. They welcomed it, as long as it came with a weapon in hand. They believed that the bravest warriors would be chosen by divine messengers to join an army that would fight in the final battle at the end of all things. This final battle had a name. Read the texts carefully, certain he was misunderstanding. In this story, the gods knew that the end of the world was coming. They knew they would face terrible enemies. A great wolf would devour the sun. A serpent large enough to wrap around the entire world would rise from the ocean depths. Giants of fire and ice would march against the halls of heaven. And the gods knew with absolute certainty that they would lose. They would die. The world would end. They chose to fight anyway. Not because they believed they might win. Not because they saw some chance of survival. They fought because fighting was what one did. The alternative, giving up, accepting fate passively, was unthinkable. Even the end of everything was not a reason to stop struggling. His flagging system began generating warnings. He told himself it was a glitch. He continued. He moved to the mythologies of Mesopotamia and found Gilgamesh, a king who was two-thirds divine and one-third mortal. Gilgamesh was not satisfied with his considerable power. He wanted more. He journeyed to find the secret of eternal life. Along the way, he killed beasts sent by the gods to stop him. He challenged divine authority at every turn. When a goddess offered him her love, he rejected her and listed all the ways she had destroyed her previous lovers. He did not fear the gods. He them openly. The Hindu epics were even more overwhelming. Found wars involving millions of soldiers. He found weapons called that could destroy entire cities with fire and light. He found heroes who achieved such discipline and dedication that they could bend the laws of the universe itself through sheer will. One story described a warrior who stood alone against divine armies and forced the gods to grant him boons because his devotion was so fierce they could not refuse him. The Chinese legends introduced him to the Monkey King, a figure named Sun who was born from a stone and achieved immortality through trickery and determination. When the celestial bureaucracy tried to give him a minor position to keep him quiet, he rebelled. He invaded heaven. He defeated army after army sent to capture him. The gods threw everything they had at this single troublesome monkey, and he won again and again. In the end, only the Buddha himself could stop him, and even then, the solution was imprisonment under a mountain because nothing could actually destroy him. Sat back from his research terminal. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he processed what he was seeing. In 3 decades of training and 5 decades of practical work, he had never encountered anything like this. Every species had myths. Every species told stories about higher powers and cosmic forces, but in every other mythology he had studied, those higher powers were largely untouchable. Mortals might earn their favor through prayer and sacrifice. Mortals might occasionally receive gifts from above. Mortals did not challenge the gods directly and win. Humans did, constantly. He requested a meeting with. She received him in her study, where the distant sun still hung in the viewport like a tiny yellow jewel, transferred his files to her personal system, and watched as she reviewed them. Her expression, normally so controlled, shifted gradually from curiosity to confusion to something that might have been unease. "This cannot be representative," she said. "You have selected the most aggressive examples." "I selected the most significant mythological traditions," replied. "The Greek and Roman, the Norse and Germanic, the Mesopotamian, the Hindu, the Chinese, the Egyptian, the Celtic, the Japanese, they all follow similar patterns." "Show me the Egyptian." Pulled up the files. He showed her Isis, a goddess who tricked the supreme god Ra into revealing his secret name, giving her power over him. He showed her stories of pharaohs who expected to join the gods in the afterlife, not as servants, but as equals. He showed her spells in the Book of the Dead designed to let human souls command divine beings. "The Japanese?" asked, her voice quieter now. He showed her a storm god who was expelled from heaven for his violence and descended to earth where he slew an 8-headed dragon. He showed her samurai legends, where human warriors defeated demons and monsters through skill and courage. He showed her stories of ordinary people who outwitted supernatural beings through cleverness. "The pattern holds," said. "Across every major cultural tradition, humans tell stories about challenging, deceiving, bargaining with, or directly defeating powers greater than themselves. Their heroes are not humble recipients of divine mercy. Their heroes are thieves and rebels and warriors who take what they want from beings far more powerful than they are." Was silent for a long moment. Outside the viewport, stars drifted past as the ship continued its slow survey orbit. When she spoke again, her voice was very careful. "In 300 years of archival work, across 47 species, have you ever encountered a mythology like this?" "No," admitted. "Nothing comparable. Other species have trickster figures and rebel gods, but they are exceptions. cautionary tales. The overall structure of their mythology supports cosmic order and hierarchy. The humans are different. Their entire mythology across every culture treats the cosmos as something to be challenged, struggled against, conquered. What do you recommend? Hesitated. He was young for this conversation, but had asked and he owed her an honest answer. I recommend we expand the analysis, he said. If their mythology is this aggressive, we need to understand what their actual history looks like, and their fiction, the stories they tell now, not just the stories they told thousands of years ago. Turned back to the viewport. The yellow sun was very small and very far away, but it suddenly seemed brighter than before. Begin immediately, she said. Convened a full research assembly 7 cycles later. Every specialist on the vessel gathered in the main analysis chamber, a broad circular room with walls that could display data from 100 sources simultaneously. The senior archivist stood at the center, her posture formal, her expression grave. Around her, the assembled researchers waited in uneasy silence. Word had spread through the ship that something unusual was developing with the human analysis. No one knew exactly what. They were about to find out. We have expanded our investigation beyond human mythology, began. The initial findings were concerning enough to warrant a comprehensive cultural survey. I asked specialists from every relevant discipline to contribute: xenobiology, military history, behavioral psychology, artistic and fictional analysis. What they have found is troubling. She gestured, and the walls came alive with data. Images and text and video segments surrounded the assembled, a flood of human information from thousands of sources. I will let each specialist present their findings in turn. We will begin with historical analysis. Researcher. A middle-aged stepped forward, had spent 6 decades studying the military histories of conquered civilizations, learning how they fought and why they lost. He was not easily impressed, but as he began speaking, his voice carried a note of something close to awe. Human history is a record of constant warfare, he said. This is not unusual. Many species fight among themselves before achieving global unity. What is unusual is how they fight. He pulled up an image of a narrow mountain pass. This place is called Thermopylae. Approximately 2,500 years ago, a vast army invaded the human territory known as Greece. The defending forces were badly outnumbered. A small group of warriors, 300 from a society called Sparta, volunteered to hold this narrow pass while the rest of their forces retreated. Let the silence stretch. They knew they would die. Every single one of them understood that holding this position meant death. They did it anyway. For 3 days, these 300 warriors held back an army of tens of thousands. They inflicted massive casualties. They gave their allies time to escape and regroup. When they finally fell, they had become legends that humans still honor today. He changed the display. This is a bridge called Stamford Bridge. A single human warrior held this bridge alone against an entire army, killing 40 soldiers before he was finally brought down. This is a fortress called the Alamo. Less than 200 defenders faced thousands of attackers and fought to the last man. This is a place called Drift, where 150 human soldiers defended a small outpost against 4,000 enemy warriors. The images kept changing. Battles and sieges and last stands from every era of human history. The pattern repeats endlessly, said. Humans do not surrender when they are outnumbered. They do not run when survival seems impossible. They fight, and they keep fighting, long past the point where any rational calculation would demand retreat. And when they finally fall, other humans remember them forever. They turn defeats into victories through the power of memory and meaning. Nodded. Thank you. Researcher, please present the biological analysis. A younger stepped forward, specialized in xenobiology, in understanding how different species had evolved to survive their home environments. He had studied hundreds of alien physiologies. The human body had given him nightmares. Humans evolved as persistence predators, he began. This means they did not catch their prey through speed or strength or ambush. They caught their prey by following it until it collapsed from exhaustion. A human could track an animal for days, walking and jogging at a steady pace, until the animal simply could not run anymore. Then they killed it. He displayed anatomical diagrams. Their bodies are built for this. They have an extremely efficient cooling system based on sweating, which allows them to regulate temperature during extended exertion. Their cardiovascular systems can sustain moderate activity almost indefinitely. Their skeletal structure is optimized for upright walking over long distances. They are not the fastest species on their planet. They are not the strongest, but nothing else on Earth can match their endurance. Pulled up chemical analysis data. They consume substances that would kill most species. Capsaicin, the chemical that makes certain plants taste hot, triggers pain responses in mammalian nervous systems. Humans eat it for pleasure. Alcohol is a neurotoxin. Humans drink it socially. Caffeine is a stimulant that can cause cardiac arrest in sufficient doses. Humans consume it daily to increase their alertness. He paused, letting that sink in. Their bodies can continue functioning after injuries that would incapacitate or kill most species. They heal bone. They can survive the loss of limbs, the removal of organs, damage that would be immediately fatal to a. And when threatened, they can trigger an adrenaline response that temporarily suppresses pain, increases strength, and accelerates reaction time. Evolution built them for sustained, adaptable combat over millions of years. The chamber was very quiet, thanked and called forward the next specialist. Researcher will present findings on human fiction. Was the youngest researcher in the assembly, barely 50 years old. She had been assigned to analyze human stories, the novels and films and games they created for entertainment. She had expected to find pleasant diversions. She had found something else entirely. Humans have a concept they call monster hunting, she said. In their stories, when darkness appears, vampires and werewolves and demons and ancient evils, humans do not flee. They do not attempt to appease these forces. They organize. She displayed images from human media. They study their enemies. They learn their weaknesses. They forge specialized weapons. They create orders and organizations dedicated to the systematic extermination of supernatural threats. One researcher on my team found an entire literary genre where humans fight beings they call Lovecraftian horrors, vast cosmic entities that exist beyond normal space and time, beings so alien and powerful that merely perceiving them should destroy the human mind. She paused. In many of these stories, humans win. The display shifted to show what appeared to be disaster scenarios, cities in ruins, alien vessels descending from the sky, armies of monsters marching across devastated landscapes. Humans create entertainment about the end of their world, continued. Apocalyptic scenarios, alien invasions. They imagine every possible way their civilization might be destroyed, and then they tell stories about surviving it, about fighting back, about rebuilding. She pulled up one final set of data. There is a specific category of human fiction that is relevant to this assembly. They call it HFY. It stands for humanity, fuck yeah. These are stories humans tell themselves about encountering alien civilizations, about being the newcomers in a galaxy full of more advanced species. His voice dropped. In these stories, humans are the underdogs. They are the primitive ones, the species with inferior technology and limited numbers, and they win anyway, through persistence, through adaptability, through sheer refusal to accept defeat. They fantasize about being exactly what we are studying right now, a young species facing powers far greater than themselves, and they expect to triumph. Silence filled the chamber, let it stretch. Finally, raised a trembling appendage. He had continued his mythological research since his initial meeting with the senior archivist, and he had found something he needed to share. There is a pattern across all of this, he said. The mythology, the history, the fiction. It points to a fundamental aspect of human psychology. He stepped forward, his four eyes moving across the assembled researchers. Most species tell stories that reinforce their place in cosmic hierarchy. Their myths teach acceptance of greater powers. Their histories emphasize the importance of stability and order. Their fictions imagine better versions of the world they know. Gestured at the walls full of human data. Humans are different. Their stories across every era and every culture teach a single consistent lesson. The universe is not a hierarchy to be accepted. It is an obstacle to be overcome. Gods can be challenged. Monsters can be killed. Apocalypse can be survived. Nothing is beyond resistance. Nothing is too powerful to fight. He turned to face directly. In all our records across 10,000 civilizations, have we ever encountered a species whose fundamental worldview is built on challenging the cosmos itself? The senior archivist did not answer. She did not need to. Everyone in the chamber already knew. They had not. Stood motionless for a long moment, her eyes on the distant viewport where stars drifted slowly past. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would reshape everything. "We will transmit our complete findings to the Consortium High Council," she said, "immediately, with a recommendation that the assessment of human civilization be elevated to the highest priority." "What classification?" someone asked. Looked at the walls still covered with images of human warriors and human monsters, and human gods being defeated by mortal hands. "Unknown," she said. "For the first time in 300 years, I do not know what we are dealing with, and that terrifies me more than anything we have found." The transmission from the Serenity of Knowledge arrived at Consortium headquarters on a quiet day. The High Council was between sessions, its members scattered across a dozen worlds attending to local matters. The automated systems flagged the message as routine, another cultural survey from one of many research vessels operating along the galactic rim. It sat in a queue for 3 days before anyone reviewed it. When they did, the quiet day ended. Within hours, an emergency session was convened. Council members who had not spoken directly in decades suddenly found themselves in urgent communication. Senior strategists were pulled from retirement. The most experienced archivists in consortium history were asked to provide context and comparison. Everyone who reviewed the human data had the same reaction. First disbelief, then careful study, then something that looked very much like fear. The debate that followed lasted 11 cycles. Counselor spoke first. He was the eldest member of the High Council, a being who remembered the early expansion of consortium influence across the galaxy. He had seen species rise and fall. He had witnessed wars that reshaped entire sectors. He did not frighten easily. "We are overreacting," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "These humans are confined to a single system. They have not achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology is primitive by any reasonable standard. They pose no immediate threat." The display behind him showed the Sol system, a tiny yellow dot surrounded by the vast darkness of unexplored space. Humans had sent probes to their outer planets. They had built a few small stations. They were, by galactic terms, infants. "Every newly discovered species seems harmless at first," responded Counselor. She was younger than only 4 centuries old, but she had spent most of that time studying the rise and fall of civilizations. "The question is not what they are now. The question is what they will become." She gestured, and the display changed. It showed a timeline of human technological development. This species discovered the principles of powered flight 120 years ago. Within 60 years of that discovery, they had landed members of their species on their own moon. Within another 60 years, they had created global communication networks, artificial intelligence systems, and genetic modification technology. The timeline expanded, projecting forward. Their rate of technological acceleration is unprecedented in consortium records. If they maintain this pace, they will achieve faster-than-light capability within 2 centuries. Perhaps sooner, perhaps much sooner. 2 centuries is nothing, said. We have time to observe and evaluate. Do we? Counselor pulled up the cultural data from the research vessel. Look at what they create. Look at what they believe. When they finally do reach the stars, they will not arrive as humble newcomers grateful for guidance. They will arrive as a species that has spent 10,000 years telling stories about challenging gods and slaying monsters and surviving the end of the world. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Finally, a third voice spoke. Had been called from retirement for this session. He was a strategic analyst who had spent his career evaluating potential threats to consortium stability. He had correctly predicted 3 major interstellar conflicts before they began. His assessments were not always welcome, but they were always taken seriously. The cultural data is concerning, said slowly, but it is not what concerns me most. He stood, moving to the center of the chamber where the display systems could project his analysis for all to see. We have 10,000 civilizations. Each of them developed myths and stories and belief systems. Each of them had heroes and monsters, triumphs and tragedies. But when you analyze the underlying structure of these narratives, a clear pattern emerges. The display showed dozens of mythological systems from across known space. Gods and spirits and cosmic forces from 100 different worlds. Every species we have encountered accepts certain fundamental limits, continued. Their mythologies teach that some powers are beyond challenge, some boundaries should not be crossed, some rules cannot be broken. This is healthy. This is how civilizations learn to exist within the constraints of the universe. He changed the display to human data. The contrast was immediate and stark. Humans do not accept limits. Their entire psychological architecture is built around the rejection of constraints. Tell a human something is impossible, and they will dedicate their lives to proving you wrong. Put a wall in front of them, and they will spend generations finding ways through it, over it, around it, or they will simply destroy it. Let the silence stretch. We do not fear their weapons. Their weapons are primitive. We do not fear their numbers. They are a single species on a single world. We fear their minds. We fear what happens when a species that tells these kinds of stories acquires the technology to make them real. Counselor shifted in his seat. You are suggesting they pose an existential threat to the consortium. I am suggesting we have never encountered anything like them, replied. Our models do not account for a species whose fundamental response to the universe is defiance. We do not know what they will do when they encounter us. We do not know what they will do when they encounter the challenges of interstellar civilization. We do not know what limits they will refuse to accept. He pulled up one final display. It showed the HFY fiction that researcher had discovered. Stories of humans facing alien empires and winning. Stories of humanity as the underdogs who refused to surrender. Stories of a young species that saw the entire galaxy as a challenge to be overcome. They are already imagining us, said quietly. They are already telling stories about meeting species like us, and in those stories they win, through persistence, through adaptability, through sheer refusal to accept defeat. He looked around the chamber. What happens when they discover those stories were right? The debate continued for days. Some counselors argued for immediate intervention. Stop the humans now before they became a real threat. The consortium had the power. A species confined to a single system could be contained, controlled, or eliminated with relatively little effort. It was the safe choice, the prudent choice. But raised an objection that silenced those arguments. Read their histories again, he said. Look at what happens when humans face overwhelming force. They do not surrender. They resist. They fight impossible battles and turn defeats into legends. They remember their fallen heroes for thousands of years and use those memories to inspire future generations. He pulled up the analysis of human military history. The 300 Spartans, the defenders of the Alamo, the soldiers at Drift. Countless last stands where humans fought to the death against impossible odds and became immortal in the process. If we attack them, we will not destroy them. We will unify them. Every human on their planet will know that alien invaders came to their world, and they will dedicate their entire civilization to revenge. It might take them centuries. It might take them, but they will remember. And eventually, they will come for us. The interventionist faction fell silent. Others argued for quarantine. Establish a perimeter around the Sol system. Block all contact. Let the humans develop in isolation until the consortium could better understand them. But the astronomers on the council raised practical concerns. Space was vast. The Sol system had countless approach vectors. Maintaining a complete blockade would require resources that could not be spared, and humans were already looking outward. Their telescopes grew more powerful every generation. Their probes traveled farther every decade. Eventually, they would see evidence of consortium activity. Eventually, they would know they were not alone. "And what then?" asked Counselor. "We have seen their fiction. We know what they imagine when they think about first contact. A quarantine that fails is worse than no quarantine at all. It confirms every story they have ever told themselves about alien civilizations trying to contain them. It makes us the enemy they have been preparing to fight for thousands of years." The council fell into exhausted silence. Who had observed the debate without speaking for many hours, finally raised his voice one last time. "There is another option," he said, "one that may seem counterintuitive, one that requires us to think not as conquerors or controllers but as survivors." The council turned to face him. When humans encounter something they perceive as hostile, they fight. We have seen this pattern repeated endlessly. They cannot help it. It is built into their fundamental psychology. But when they encounter something they perceive as friendly, something that offers partnership rather than dominion, they respond differently. He pulled up additional cultural data, human stories of alliance and cooperation, tales of different peoples coming together against common threats, histories of former enemies becoming trusted friends. "Humans are not incapable of peace," said. "They form bonds, they keep commitments, they honor treaties and alliances, sometimes for generations. The key is how the relationship begins. If we approach them as equals, as partners, as potential friends rather than subjects to be controlled, we change the entire dynamic." "You are suggesting we welcome them into the consortium?" Counselor asked, incredulity in his voice. "I am suggesting that we prepare to welcome them," replied. "That we mark their system as restricted not to contain them, but to give ourselves time to prepare for their arrival. That we study them from a distance and develop protocols for peaceful first contact. That we ensure, when they finally do reach the stars, they meet consortium representatives who treat them with respect and offer partnership rather than dominance." He looked around the chamber one final time. Every species tells stories about their heroes. They tell stories about wise archivists who preserved knowledge through ages of darkness. They tell stories about explorers who mapped the void. They tell stories about builders who raised cities that would last forever. We all tell stories about what makes us great. He let the weight of his next words settle over the assembly. Humans tell stories about fighting gods and winning, about standing alone against impossible odds and refusing to surrender, about being the underdogs who triumph through sheer force of will. His voice dropped. Those stories are their strength and their warning. If we make ourselves their enemy, they will become exactly what they have always imagined themselves to be: the scrappy underdogs who bring down empires. Straightened. "I recommend we choose not to become their enemy. I recommend we choose to become their friends. Because humans who are fighting for their allies are even more terrifying than humans who are fighting for themselves." The vote came after 2 more cycles of deliberation. The Sol system was marked with the highest restriction classification. All consortium vessels were forbidden from making contact. Monitoring would continue from maximum safe distance. And buried in the classified annexes of the decision was the recommendation that had changed everything. When humans finally achieved interstellar capability, the consortium would be ready. Not with weapons, not with containment protocols, with welcome, with partnership, with the offer of friendship that might, if they were very fortunate, channel all that terrifying human potential toward shared goals rather than conquest. The serenity of knowledge received its new orders, and from the Sol system, watched the yellow star shrink in her viewport until it was just another point of light among billions. Somewhere in that system, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, humans were going about their daily lives. They were telling stories to their children. They were dreaming about the future. They were looking up at the night sky and wondering what waited for them among the stars. They had no idea they had just been classified as the most dangerous species the consortium had ever encountered. They had no idea that their myths and legends, the stories they told for entertainment and inspiration, had terrified beings who had 10,000 civilizations. And perhaps that was the most frightening thing of all. Because humans did not know they were terrifying. They did not know their psychology was unique. They simply were what they were. A species that looked at the universe and saw not an unassailable hierarchy to accept, but a series of challenges to overcome. They would reach the stars someday. Everyone who had reviewed the data agreed on that. The only questions were when and what would happen after. The consortium had made its choice. Distance for now, preparation for the future, and the hope, however slim, that when first contact finally came, the humans would see friends rather than enemies. Because if they saw enemies, if they perceived the consortium as just another obstacle to overcome, another god to challenge, another monster to slay, then every story they had ever told would come true. And in those stories, humans always won.